going to be talking about the literary ideas behind the Warner Brothers cartoons in 1952. So in particular, the relation of how the culture in the era relates to the ideas that then show up in the cartoons. So literary studies. So what are literary studies? They are the examination of literature for a variety of thoughts and ideas spurred on for different reasons in general. So there are different theories on how to find or look for meaning in a text. So like in international relations, we have thoughts on realism and constructivism. Likewise, we have thoughts in literature. So you've got ideas like new historicism, new criticism, Marxism, post-colonialism, and a great deal of others. So what I've done in this project is more aligned with the ideas of new historicism and with a dash of post-critique through close readings. And we use this to look at culture as the text. So since we're doing new historicism, what is new historicism? And it's the idea of reading a text in a manner that emphasizes the historicity of it. So relating it to a way in the world, how it's set up, how the world is set up according to power, society, ideology, how do these things interact. And we're looking at historical constructs and then drilling down to find the creative power that went into making this piece of work. So in the case of the Warner Brothers cartoons, we have a lot of history happening around them, and so we're looking at the interaction between the cartoons and the historical events. So in 1952, you've got the Cold War, you have the joys of nuclear weapons really coming into their full. You have different ideologies now really permeating the globe in a bipolar realm. So you have the US and you have the Soviet Union. We also have the Korean War, and it's a hot conflict, although in 1952 it's starting to quiet down at that point. But it's one point where the United Nations actually went into a country with a multinational force. And the second time that would happen would be not until the first Gulf War. But anyway, and also there's an American presidential election about to happen, 1952. President Truman is in office and he is not seeking a return. Now Dwight D. Eisenhower is going to be running for office eventually. But here we look back at the theory of the writing and the idea of that creative power pushing a text forward. Because as much as we like to, cartoons don't necessarily have a lot of text in them. In the case of the Roadrunner episodes, they don't have any speaking whatsoever. So it's hard to say, oh, well, this is what that character's saying. We can judge things off that, which is where the new historicism comes into play. So why Warner Brothers? Why Chuck Jones? Well, because of new historicism. So the new historicism theory allows us to look at culture as a text, which means we can start taking things that aren't traditional, pamphlets, signage, advertisements, cartoons, and looking at those. So we're anticipating seeing reflections of the culture in the cartoons, moving forward with the ideas of the time and the age. So Warner Brothers is one of many studios in the time. So there's MGM and Disney and Paramount. And they're all producing cartoons. And the points of a lot of these cartoons was effectively the music video of the day. So the Merry Melodies and the Looney Tunes were contractually obliged to have several choruses from a Warner Brothers musical. And so then that would help sell the sheet music that Warner Brothers would sell on the side, which is good times for everyone. But I chose Warner Brothers because I grew up watching Bugs Bunny, so it was a natural fit. Also, 1952 is a period of relative stability. And most of the historians will laugh at me when I say, you know, it's stable. Was there any stable time? Well, relatively here. And also it was a stable time in the time of the studio itself. So the way that the studio was conducting business changed over time. And by 1952, things had settled down. You had Chuck Jones as director from about 1944 to the late 1960s. So a period of stability allows us to look at the literature and make some other conclusions. Right, so go on to the history of the studio itself. Bridge. There's in 1929, two men by the name of Hugh Harman and Rudy Ising, who combined to create Harmonizing Productions. It was their real names. I checked. They lost their jobs with Disney, and so they were looking to find new places for work, and they created a demo reel, which was picked up by a guy by the name of Leon Schlesinger, and he was taken by it, pitched it to Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers hired him to manage the studio that was then creating the cartoons being produced by Mr. Harman, Mr. Ising. And things went pretty well, except that Mr. Schlesinger was able to pinch a penny until it screamed. And so it didn't sit well with Mr. Harman and Mr. Ising, who then left in 1935 to go to the studios of MGM. And Mr. Schlesinger had a rebellion of the under-directors, so he hired a new guy by the name of Tex Avery, in case that resonates with anyone. And Tex Avery was in charge until he left in 1944, along with Schlesinger, who sold his stake in the production company to Warner Brothers. So Chuck Jones was given authority over it. And this is the short version, but there's other stuff involved. Ironically enough, Tex Avery also left for MGM Studios. But, so looking at what I actually found, I looked at, there were 10 cartoons produced in 1952 by Chuck Jones while he was as director. And they included the characters of Wile E. Coyote, Pepe Le Pew, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Roadrunner, Marvin the Martian, a couple others. It's a wide variety. There's only, well, there are 3 that incorporate Wile E. Coyote, but in 2 different formats. But a variety of ideas appear during this examination. So you look in it, and I'm seeing 3 themes that are coming up and reoccurring there. So there's an anxiety towards technology, there's a reoccurring use of classical themes and ideas, and there's the triumph of the unassuming character. So, in effect, a fantasy world was created where weak characters who would traditionally be eaten, perhaps, are actually the winners. So you'd think in a Roadrunner and a Coyote dynamic, or a Rabbit and a Coyote dynamic, the Coyote should win, and yet that's not the case. So what this offers is, in effect, a certain amount of escapism of the day, where the little guy's winning. So the anxieties over technology, it's a vibrant theme, and it's throughout the episodes in pretty much every single one. The primary uses of technology are like Wile E. Coyote or Marvin the Martian, or the mad scientist in the episode Water, Water, Every Hair. And it's always used by characters that are bad guys. So you see the bad guy characters creating a plan to set up some dynamite with a glass of water so that when you pull the glass of water up, it strikes the match and lights the stick of TNT. And but with these technological advantages, you think they win, but they never do. So we're going to look at one episode in particular, Operation Rabbit. And in this episode, the Coyote has been trying to get Bugs the entire time. He's gone up and spoken very eloquently and said, "You should give yourself up already. I'm a super genius." And Bugs is not convinced. So the Coyote uses a pressure cooker, a cannon with connecting pipes, a decoy rabbit, and finally a flying saucer, which that's the moment we're going to see here. These technology being used to apprehend the character, and then being turned around by actually a very simple solution. So you see the Coyote with this very complex idea, and it becomes nullified by a pencil. So, and this happens again and again in the episodes where it is a simple tool that turns the plan upside down, or it is the exact same idea turned around. Like in the case of the decoy rabbit, then Bugs creates a decoy coyote that goes in and blows up instead. So, but the natural dynamic of hunter and prey is messed up with the coyote beating the rabbit. There's another episode where there is Claude the cat, who is trying to get rid of the other animal in the house, Frisky the dog. And so Claude is trying all sorts of means to remove the dog. And at one point, he's got this fishing rod and with a bone. And he's trying to lure the dog out of the house. And that ends terribly for the cat as he is flung over a fence, and there's a great deal of hijinks that involve him failing again in the attempt of using technology. But to reference again the idea that the coyote is speaking with eloquence, he's a high context character, if you will, in the realm of comic studies, where he's using big words and correct grammar, and then Bugs says slang, and he references just ideas that are not of this upper class of thought. And one of the episodes then we move to is the idea of Bugs being pursued by a mad scientist, and the mad scientist trying to grab Bugs' brain for a robot. And but in the episode, in the early parts, we see a tremendous amount of classical reference in here by the way of the music. So I'll play it for you. Well, actually, I will describe it for you as the sound is not working. So, but in this episode, we see the high and low context of classical reference and popular reference. So the title of the episode is Water, Water Everywhere, and that's a pun on the Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, Water, Water Everywhere, or the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And at the very beginning of the episode, there's a torrential downpour coming, and the music that's playing is Chopin's Prelude No. 15 in D flat major, also known as the Raindrop Prelude. Well, it starts raining and Bugs is in there, and he's sleeping, and the music changes to Wiegenlied, Opus 49, No. 4, or Brahms's Lullaby. Bugs gets up, goes to get a drink, and the music changes again to How Dry I Am. And he goes back to sleeping on the mattress, and it turns into incidental orchestra music. Then the mattress gets up and begins to float away, and Bugs is still sleeping on there. It floats past the castle of an evil scientist who has the wonderful words on it saying boo, and evil scientist flashing in fluorescent lights on the inside of his castle. And then it actually zooms into the actual scientist, and he talks in the manner of Vincent Price, who was a famous movie star of the era in the realm of sort of mystery, horror, but evil scientist stuff. So he's very much fitting that role. And he's lamenting about how much his robot creation would be able to go and do things if only he had a living brain. And so we look back at this and we say, well, look at all the cultural references. We see classical music from hundreds of years ago from Chopin, and then we see the references to modern day ideas like Vincent Price. We see references to The Wizard of Oz in If Only He Had a Brain. And these references are not terribly hidden if you're familiar with the subject matter. So they're done for comedic effect, and it's done in a way that the audience would probably have been able to appreciate it and acknowledge that, hey, this is normal. This is something going on that we can be used to. And we also see then the evil scientist using mechanical devices. So like he fishes Bugs up with a fishing rod, and then he's chasing him around the castle with all this technical equipment. And it's more of the bad guy using the mechanical ideas to subdue the innocent character, in this case, Bugs Bunny. But the references are not just here and not in just music. So in the episode Little Beau Pepe, on one of the walls in a French Foreign Legion outpost, there's a poster that says, and it's actually in your handout, Uncle Franco wants you. And it's a play on the Uncle Sam poster. So again, we're seeing these relatively recent ideas cropping up again. There's also moments where Pepe dons a hat in the vein of Napoleon in Mouse Warming, the episode. The young man drives a hot rod and then the bulldog's eyes turn red before he beats the cat to a pulp. In Wile E. Coyote, he talks like a genius. Bugs is using slang, and these ideas are just occurring side by side throughout the episodes. But it brings us to the idea of the unassuming character. And these are characters that walk through life, not touching technology. They're not reaching out for cultural touchstones. They're being set upon and delivered by their innocence. So this is applying to characters across the spectrum, across all the episodes that I looked at. And so in the episode of Rabbit Seasoning, you see Daffy Duck trying to get Bugs blasted by Elmer Fudd. And it's actually part of a series of 3 episodes that occurred in different years. But so in this one, Daffy is putting up signs all along the way saying rabbit 150 feet, rabbit 120 feet. And there's Burma shave style signs talking about the rabbit. And once again, there's the character of the rabbit being set upon by either Daffy or Elmer Fudd, as the case may be. Perhaps we could call him an accomplice. But Bugs is the unaggressive character who is just defending himself when he's being set upon. But likewise characters, the Roadrunner, Frisky, Penelope from the Pepe Le Pew cartoons. And it's all these characters that are being pursued or chased or attacked by the other characters with technology. So what we learn from this then is that we see examples of the 3 ideas identified from the text, from the close reading of the episodes. And we can think about their relationship to the bigger context. So the concerns and worries of the day were very real to those people, and they would walk into their movie theater because television wasn't the big thing yet. And we see identity of polarization. We have one character trying to go after another character. And there's actually some very interesting literature that compares the idea of the coyote and the roadrunner to B.F. Kennan's, or The Long Telegram, where there is the world that's changing into one of Soviet aggression versus the American resilience. And that's why you see the roadrunner never leave the highway. And it's always the coyote's plans that blow up in his face when he's trying to get the roadrunner. And this theory that the Soviet Union is trying to get the United States, but the United States can come back and win, like in the cartoons. So we also see the idea of cultural touchstones and how there's massive misappropriation of technology, history, eloquence. So Daffy Duck goes pronoun trouble when he gets blown up for the 3rd time. And yes, Bugs used the words originally, but it was Daffy who's doing the naming. So the use, the misappropriation of the culture turns into the destruction of the antagonistic characters. And putting this in the cultural context of the Cold War, we see the new historicist moment where culture is being influenced by the text, but how the text is reinforcing the cultural perspective. So people who would go into the theater would come out, in effect, thinking ideas similar to, it's reinforcing their concepts of what's going on. So people would see the cartoons and ideas about things like the underdog winning, and they would feel more affirmed, and then the text, it's sort of a feedback loop, it can be, but the idea is that the culture is a text itself that can be read, and people were able to look at something as simple as a cartoon, which doesn't have a massive amount of literary idea, perhaps, associated with it. But it's still creating a fantasy world where the little guy could still win. So, and that's all, folks.
I was wondering how the theme of the underdog winning specifically fits into the Cold War, where the United States was one of two like really major powers in the globe.
Yeah, so the idea would then be more about anxiety about the country as a whole not being able to beat the Russians, perhaps, and that the well, okay, so the Soviets get the bomb in '49. Then there are nuclear tests following after that, and there's a certain amount of propaganda about how the Soviet Union is doing. And we look at the ideas between the Soviet Union and the United States and their ideas of liberal thought. So I would say that the United States is more open to criticism, so there's actually the presence of some ideas of criticism, whereas in the Soviet Union, the ideas would be less liberal in that regard. So you could have the seeds of doubt, perhaps, in the United States, and questions about, well, are we doing the right thing? Are we going to be successful? And the anxiety probably gets worse in like 1958 when Sputnik goes up. And the entire space race has an underdog feel. But this is, I'm assuming, stemming from earlier points in time then. So those concepts, and also we look at the creators of these cartoons, so Chuck Jones and co. They would have lived through World War II. And the, you think about Nazi Germany was a dominant power in the early 40s, and it was sort of come back from behind idea in the entrance of the US into the war and for other civilizations going on like that. So I guess it's a great question. Dr. Heidel?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, that was interesting. I had a question that you sort of piqued my interest at the very beginning, and then I wanted to know more, even though it's not properly a new historicist question. So when you said that you had examined 10 cartoons that were directed by Chuck Jones, I assume that that means that in 1952 there were other cartoons produced by Warner Brothers that were not directed by Chuck Jones.
Correct.
Suggesting that you singled out Chuck Jones as though you might have an interest in his own perspectives or biographical information, which is not properly new historicist, because that's, you know, too much like implying that the author shapes things instead of culture. Mm-hmm. But I think since you chose it, you must be interested, right? Mm-hmm. So can you connect Chuck Jones personally to some of the ideas that you're talking about here?
There is a certain amount of change in direction of the episodes based on director, certain amount. There's a collection of directors in the studio. So Chuck Jones was one of several that's directing them. There is more work done on the Chuck Jones episodes than on the other episodes.
Because he had a longer and more illustrious career?
He was a more prolific writer, so people were willing to interview him more. Oh. Yeah.
So you do not have an individual interest in Chuck Jones. It's more like there's a corpus of research materials.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. It's the idea of looking for your keys where the light is better. Looking for your keys where the light is better. So, yeah. Right. Yes, Dr. Lippert.
Yeah, it's interesting though, like following up on the Chuck Jones stuff, the quotation you have in the pamphlet, it really almost kind of speaks to that attitude of, you know, sort of a 1950s American notion of Bugs being for peace in his home, refusing to be put upon, being treated as a citizen rather than a rabbit. That seems kind of reflective of the times almost, and so I'm almost wondering if Chuck Jones is injecting that into the cartoons that he writes, and that's reflecting the culture but also making the culture kind of simultaneously.
Yeah, it's the director that was in charge before Chuck Jones was a guy by the name of Robert Clampett, and he had a more heroic perspective on the cartoons. And he was working in concert with Chuck Jones and another director whose name I can't recall at the moment, but his direction was to a certain extent more for the rabbit or whatever, the character being the hero of the story. And that was similar to what some of the other cartoons in the era were doing. So when Chuck Jones comes in, his philosophy was that to reveal the ideas of the human flaws and human characters inherent in the characters. So yeah, there is a modicum of the change in direction, but I concentrated on the Chuck Jones episodes because there was more material there. Yes.
Yeah, hi. It's a very interesting presentation, and I was wondering, I realized that you were focusing on the commentary that these cartoons make about what's going on politically in the United States, but I wonder if you've thought at all about any sort of cultural commentary that the cartoons are making about their own place as a relatively new genre, media genre. Like, so and the reason I thought of that is that there's all these references to movie stars, right? Like Pepe Le Pew is supposed to be Maurice Le Chevalier, I think, and Vincent Price and all this stuff. So clearly there's somewhat of a comment on cinema, maybe, and other cultural genres taking place here, and I was just wondering if you have anything to say about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So later on in the series, you see the episodes that star Daffy Duck that say, "Where am I?" And it's the episode where Bugs Bunny is essentially the animator, and he's drawing Daffy Duck in different situations. And it's a very interesting episode where it's breaking the fourth wall in so many ways. And in the episodes I looked at, there is a certain amount of breaking the fourth wall, especially by characters like Pepe Le Pew. He's always turning and making comments to the audience. Now, this was more prominent under the Tex Avery point in time. And he would have characters dragging the frame of the camera in different directions. Now, the Chuck Jones characters in that era are not as active in that pursuit. So they are very static, and they're not really changing much. So they go in and they have their particular ideas. So Wile E. Coyote is reenacting the idea of Sisyphus rolling the stone up the hill in his pursuit of the Roadrunner, and Bugs is the set upon rabbit. But they don't break the ideas of the cartoon as much as other directors did. So.
Because it just seems like what I know about these cartoons is that they seem to be flaunting what cartoons can do over cinema. Like you can't in cinema, have someone go off a cliff and then, be reborn, right? I mean, I guess you can kind of, but
there's certain realism that's suspended with the cartoons then.
I just, so again, like everyone else, I thought this was pretty interesting. So I guess I have kind of two, related questions. One would be, if you could say a little bit more about the comedy in these. I mean, so you talk about the fact that, and these are, meant to be sort of, poking, jabbing a little bit. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about, why these are framed as a sort of comedic element as opposed to some other, sort of more dramatic or cartoon or just, pure fantasy. Like what, you talk about the fantasy world of where the little guy wins and so forth. What is the comedy doing for these? And then how does that relate to this sort of Cold War context? Like how does, this sort of, fear of the Soviet Union, the possibility of, Marxism or communism, emerging organically out of the United States and things like this. how does that, sort of relate to the comedy that's taking place in these?
Okay. Well, for the first point, by nature, these are they were warm-ups for movies. So they're supposed to get the audience engaged and aiming towards, that's the purpose of the comedy in them. And finding the other context of comedy in it is, a lot of it is in the unexpected. So I believe it's the episode Beep Beep, the coyote is going to drop an anvil on the Roadrunner, and then he's flung into the air, and it turns out he's wearing a backpack. He pulls the cord on what we assume is a parachute, and then an apple, a pencil, all this other stuff goes flying out of it, and he hits the ground. And with that, it's constantly trying to surprise you. So how it relates to the greater context of the Cold War, I would say escapism to a certain extent, because it was some very heavy and serious stuff that was going on. And I'd say there's a good deal of anxiety. So bringing a little light into people's lives. Okay. Yes?
I was wondering if you thought at all about what happens after 1952, and I was thinking in particular about Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century, where it's a pretty pointed critique of nuclear annihilation, at least at the end of that cartoon. And it seems like there's kind of a dividing point that occurs where these cartoons do get a lot more pointed, at least briefly, in terms of their commentary.
Yeah. I didn't look as far into the post-1952 point in time. The cartoons from Warner Brothers were always a little darker, a little more sarcastic, and they were seen as kind of the antipode to Disney. So whereas Disney would be more light and happy, the Warner Brothers would be a little darker, more commentary on society then. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the trends continue and perhaps deepen as time goes by. And the characters have been very clearly defined then. So Daffy would be self-grubbing, miser, self-proclaimed even. And putting him into more situations where his character can stand out in that way, I think is probably going to happen. So does that answer your question?
Kind of. I mean, I think I'm sort of more interested in the sort of political sharpness, and it's very soon after. I mean, it's like Duck Dodgers. It's like 1953. So there's something clearly going on in American culture that's sort of allowing that to blossom. So yeah, I mean, I think I would agree. I think some of it involves the stock characters that have already, that's the framework to allow the cartoons to explore those issues. But. And
they absolutely wanted to use, they used popular references. They just mixed in a whole lot of classical references at the same time. So, yes, Dr. Toole.
Yeah, first of all, I found this really interesting. Thanks for presenting it. And so at the beginning, you noted 4 different literary theories, and I don't know literary theory, so I was kind of intrigued by that. And so I was wondering how these would be interpreted from a different perspective. And the one that I'm thinking of is Marxism. I don't know if there are Marxist critiques of these cartoons, but so far, from what you've told us, the new historicist critiques sound broadly sympathetic to American culture and the struggles it was going through. I assume that if they're Marxist critiques, they're going to be a lot more sort of critical of U.S. society and how this reflects U.S. society. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
So, like in a Marxist theory reading, we would be studying more on the classes and the ideas of like consumerism. So, in the episode Feed the Kitty, you're going to see the woman who owns the house. She has a mixer. She has all these different worldly possessions, and we'd say here we're trying to show her as being successful then, because she's wealthy and has these all these things around her. And so with Marxist theory, it's also based on class. And we would say Bugs Bunny is from a lower class than because he uses slang. He lives in a hole in the ground, whereas the coyote lives in a nice rock or whatever. And but so class struggle then is more present in a Marxist reading.